you all right?
I think so.
What was it?
I'm not sure, but it was well trained in the Jedi arts. My guess is he was after the Queen.
What are we gonna do about it?
We should be patient. Anakin Skywalker, meet Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Hi. You're a Jedi too? Pleased to meet you.
Oh, greetings, Bucketheads. Mevar Tegar. Welcome to our 255th Phantom Menace celebrating episode of Mandovision. Now, I'm your host, Narguy Tom, and thank you so much for checking out this small, independent Star Wars podcast. So glad that you're here. Reach out to us on the socials. We're at Mando_Vision on Twitter /X and Instagram. Email the show, mandovisiontom@gmail.com. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, and share this show with all the Mandalorians in your covert. All right, friends, let's get to it right off the bat. I have an acknowledgement of an error. And you know me, when I make a mistake, I own it. And so let's talk about it. Last week's episode, going over Tales of the Empire, and we're watching those episodes with Barriss Offee and her introduction to the Inquisitors, and I made a mistake. I thought there was another new Inquisitor in that mix, and there wasn't. It was the guy from last year's Tales of the Jedi, the Ahsoka episode in particular. And it was funny because he had a really cool look, and like the cape struck me as something as somewhat familiar. But it wasn't until this past week when I finished my reread of the Ahsoka novel by E.K. Johnston, and I was like, yeah, let me go back and watch those Tales of the Jedi episodes now. I watched the full set. I watched Dooku and the Ahsoka stories, and we get to that last Ahsoka one, the last episode of that volume of Tales of the Jedi, though, the Resolve episode that takes place. It starts off on Naboo with Ahsoka at Padme's funeral procession. And I think at the time when I initially reviewed the episode, I said, like, yes, it contradicts elements of EK's book, but not in a super detrimental sort of way. Well, after rereading the book for the first time since it had initially come out, it feels a little bit more overt in sort of changing certain aspects of the Ahsoka story, because, again, that episode and the Ahsoka book are very, very similar in their goals of getting Ahsoka back into the fight, right? And so, having reread the book very, very recently, watching those episodes, I definitely understand why people were a little bit more upset about the sort of alterations in the way in which that story was told. I still prefer the book, personally. That's just my take on it. I think there's a lot more elements of Star Wars in that book because it was something that wasn't crammed into 15 minutes of screen time. And I could break it down and get into all the particulars if we wanted to. But yeah, I wanted to acknowledge that, oh, hey, that Inquisitor in Tales of the Jedi is the one that we see in Tales of the Empire. And we won't get started on why they changed the Inquisitor from what was in the book to what we saw on the screen. But that guy does have a cool look. Clancy Brown doing a great job with those vocal stylings. And But if there's one commonality between the two Inquisitors versus Ahsoka battles, it's that Ahsoka dispatches them fairly easily without even really trying all that hard. But hey, that's we can kind of get into that some other time if you really wanted to. But yes, I made a mistake, so I own it, and there it is. Let's talk about why we are here today. We are here to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. 25 years ago, I think a lot of us know exactly where we were when we were watching this movie, and that's what we're going to do today. We're going to get together with our friend Ken, who was on my previous podcast for an episode or two, talking more about Marvel stuff. But Ken is a big Star Wars guy, somebody Ken is someone I've known of for a very long time. It wasn't until recent years that we actually kind of like got together and realized how much we had in common and kind of started texting each other about Star Wars all the time and doing all these Star Wars related things and Marvel related things still to this day. But he's a really good guy, really knowledgeable, really thoughtful guy. And he's recently become available to join us for the podcast. So he's going to get together with us today, and we're going to discuss our Phantom Menace memories and go back 25 years to those movie theater lines that I'm sure we were all standing in at the time. Obviously, younger listeners may not be in that age bracket that did the things that we did, but we're going to talk about the whole thing because I think our perspectives on this movie have gone all over the place in the 25 years since it had come out, and I will be the first to admit that I have had quite the roller coaster ride of emotions when it comes to the prequels since 1999. I was really high on them, and then they were getting all attacked by pop culture and people across other mediums and things like that. And I was like the prequel defender. I was like the prequel apologist. I would go to bat for them whenever I could, and then eventually that beat me down, and I sort of was like, oh, maybe they're not as good as I want them to be, and I'm a little disappointed. And then kind of going and getting to a place where I just accepted them for what they are. And now to the place where I am today, which is very much embracing the prequel trilogy now. Yes, there are some shortcomings to it, but I will watch these three films any day of the week. I'm actually rewatching episode 2. I just had to pause it to do the podcast, and episode 3 will be right behind it. So yeah, I've had a roller coaster relationship with the prequels. I suspect Ken has had much the same, and I suspect a lot of people in our age group are kind of all in the same boat. So I think it'll be a fun conversation to kind of talk about what we felt at the time and how we feel about them now. I think it's going to be a really informative conversation. Probably maybe a little emotional because I know Ken's love for Star Wars is right up there with mine. So it's going to be a good time. You know what that means though? It's time, my friends. Strap on your buckets and let's go.
Now this is pod racing.
All right, joining us all the way from about 4 or 5 miles away from my house, our friend Ken is joining us for the first time on Mandovision. Ken, how are you doing? And thanks for being here.
Well, it does feel very much like Golden Hill feels like a galaxy far away. So great to join you on this. I mean, I've been on some of your other podcasts, but happy to talk some Star Wars because that's always one of my passions.
Yeah, and I think that's probably between Star Wars and Marvel, I think that's like 90% of our conversations, and we sprinkle in 10% baseball.
And some Star Trek too.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, thanks for taking some time out of your work week to hang out with me. So we're here to talk about The Phantom Menace, and it came out in 1999, and I know you're a big movie guy. So I thought I'd spring this on you. Do you remember some of the other incredible movies that came out in 1999? Because it was a banging year for flicks. Like, I think we were all at the theaters for a very long stretch of time.
Obviously, I have a lot of great memories because my wife and I actually met in 1999.
Oh, wow. There you go.
I introduced her to the concept of the Oscar run, which means we see as many of the Oscar-nominated films as possible. And I kind of learned her limits that 3 or 4 movies in a day was just was too much for her. So I learned to kind of spread it out a little bit, not try to do so much. But I obviously remember 99 being a great movie year. I think, was it American Beauty won Best Picture? Am I right there?
Well, I was just going to go off of box office, but I think you're right.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because Star Wars Phantom Menace, not a terrible big surprise, was the #1 movie of the year. Number 2, The Sixth Sense.
That's right.
Number 3, Toy Story 2.
Maybe my favorite Pixar film.
Could be. Oh, and that has like some great Star Wars nods in it, if I remember correctly.
Absolutely.
Number 4. This one made me feel old. I'm not gonna lie. The Matrix.
Oof, that's right. That came in out in like I want to say February, right before. No, maybe it was April. It was like right before episode 1, and it almost kind of like maybe took a little bit of the air out of like the excitement of a science fiction film, and like, oh wow, this is pretty great too.
Right. We also had the anime Tarzan. I think the animated Tarzan, the Disney one. I think, if memory serves. There's been a lot of Tarzans, but that's the one I'm thinking of.
I think so, yeah.
We also got The Mummy. Brendan Fraser's The Mummy.
Which also had a recent re-release in theaters, which was kind of a fun like Indiana Jones light,
Yeah, I remember seeing it in theaters too and having a blast. We also got Notting Hill for all the rom-com lovers out there, all the Julia Roberts fans. There was a James Bond movie, The World Is Not Enough. Not the best entry, but it was fine. American Beauty. And Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me. That's our top 10.
Which I remember seeing. They were definitely doing a lot of parodies of Star Wars, in the film, and kind of a little goofs and tweak the nose a little bit and everything. So
Yes, and you were right. American Beauty was the best film of the year, with Sam Mendes getting the best director. Denzel Washington got best actor for The Hurricane. Hilary Swank for Boys Don't Cry. Tom Cruise got his best supporting actor for Magnolia. Like, these are all things I remember, but I'm like, that was that long ago, 25 years. It's crazy.
yeah, it's wild. Again, I think it was a great year for movies. It was definitely like it felt like pop culture was at this like explosion. The internet was really kind of like becoming like your source for everything you needed to know about upcoming movies. You had your Ain't It Cool News, you had your different websites that like were kind of just hyping you up and kind of feeding the fire of like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited for whatever the next project is going to be coming out.
Yeah, and I look fondly at those times of the kind of like early. That's to me, that's sort of like peak internet, because it was still sort of the wild west. It hadn't been like super monetized just yet. Websites weren't overrun with ads and pop-ups and all the other things. So I definitely have a fond memory of those websites at that time, for just being what they were. You could watch YouTube without 700 commercials interrupting whatever video you were watching. And
Totally, yeah.
I miss it
Again,
terribly.
I don't want to become off as, because I'm a little bit older than you. I don't want to come off as get off my lawn. Back in my day, it was much better, but it was different. And again, like now, I don't have to go pay money to go see a trailer. I can just wait for it to show up on YouTube or any other number of social media platforms, and it's there instantly.
Yeah.
Instead of having to pay money to go see Waterboy or Meet Joe Black or The Siege, like it was like, oh. Like, all right, we're gonna go see Waterboy. We're gonna get there early for the trailers, and then we're gonna sit through the credits, and then we're gonna watch it again, and then we're gonna leave after seeing it a second time.
The movie I remember seeing was Wing Commander, the Freddie Prinze Jr. classic. So I get my Phantom Menace teaser trailer.
Yeah, I mean, it was wild times there. It was just one of those things where it was very different. You had Entertainment Tonight was like the one TV show, and you'd have to like set your VCR in order to record to make sure that you could see the trailer more than once. Otherwise, you missed it, and there's never a chance to see it again.
So one of the things I was trying to remember from this period was like, because I don't recall exactly how it came to be, but so maybe you do. How did you find out about Star Wars being announced? Like was it Entertainment Tonight, something like that? Because I'm trying to think. Were we on websites and like, hey, breaking news, new Star Wars movie coming in 1999 kind of thing? I don't remember exactly.
I don't remember the exact source, but obviously when they did the re-releases into theaters, I think that was the we're writing a new Star Wars film, and we want to get everybody like back up to date, and here's what's going to be happening, and you're like, oh my gosh, like finally, after, again, you have to understand there was a long stretch where there was no Star Wars. There was basically the 3 original trilogy films, and that was it. I mean, maybe about the Ewok Adventures, maybe you talk the Ewoks and Droids animated, but like, let's be real, there was nothing really of Star Wars content for years, and there was nothing. And so, we kind of just were left in a like, oh, I guess we'll just, keep watching these movies and wearing out our VHS tapes.
Right.
And so like I said, I'm turning 50 this year, And I'm in a generation where I was the first in my like friend group to actually see all three films in order, but I did not see A New Hope in 77, and I did not see Empire in 1980, mostly because I was just I probably would not have appreciated it. And probably I was like, my parents did make the right decision there. As much as I would have loved to say, yeah, my very first movie, like dad holding me up to so I could see over like, the back of the seat. But no, I think once Jedi was released, they started doing re-releases for both A New Hope and Empire. And that's when I was like, all right, I already know everything because we talk on the playground and like we played Star Wars, and so like I knew the story, but then seeing it happen and unfold in front of my eyes was just incredible. And so I was ready for that experience to happen again in 1999. And I think the biggest thing that I take away after having seen it and actually having 25 years to process this was that no matter what, no movie could have possibly met the expectations of that kid who saw, the Star Destroyer going over after the opening crawl of A New Hope.
Right.
Because again, it was just such an incredible, mind-blowing experience the very first time. And you'll never forget your first time.
No, never.
But then I kind of like, again, expectation is just like the theft of joy, because again, I wanted it to be something more than it ever could be. And I just wanted it to be a great Star Wars movie. And at the end of the day, reflecting back on it, because again, I walked out at 2:30 in the morning after a midnight show, and all I could think about was just like, like that disappointment level. And I just kind of had to kind of like come to terms with that and kind of come to like, well, why was I disappointed? What was it? And so I had to see it a second time, of course, because everybody did. Because like, yeah, I was just really tired. I spent the whole day in line, and then because I remember, because again, this is the before times. Again, not old man yelling at cloud, but you had to actually wait in line, buy tickets weeks in advance before actually going to the theater.
Right.
And oh, by the way, seats aren't aren't like reserved. It's first come first serve. And so it was just a wild scene. I took time off from work. I collected all the Taco Bell and
Oh yeah,
Pepsi
all the
and
cup
everything.
holders.
And
Yeah.
I was all bought in. I like I said, I just met my now wife. So I remember actually at one point we were we were in the drugstore buying condoms as well as episode 1 action figures, which is kind of a weird dichotomy because here we are. But I mean, yeah, that was just the thing. It was just like it was such like a big moment in my life that I was waiting for to just absolutely transcend. And I think it helped me understand and kind of come to peace with the sequels, which again a lot of people found very disappointing. I actually kind of felt like I felt satisfied ultimately by them, even as I say the quality wasn't quite as strong. I will say one thing about Phantom Menace is I think this is absolutely George Lucas's vision, and I feel like he absolutely positively nailed his vision because he was making that movie for the 8, 9, 10-year-old in 1999.
Yeah.
Not the cynical 24-year-old just kind of wanting to get that transport back to 77, but that 77 is you can't go back and recapture that.
Right. No, for sure. Let me go back for a minute too, because again, this is my recollections. Let me know if you disagree or you remember a little bit differently or anything. The build up for this movie was so much, right? Like this is all people could talk about. People were losing their minds. This movie had crazy marketing behind it. The toys were out. People lined up at toy stores. Me lined up at toy stores to get like the first wave of the Phantom Menace figures. I knew who these characters were before the movie came out for months because I had the toys and I read the little bios on the back of the cards and everything. I also remember at the time print media was still being very successful. And being in the Star Wars fan club meant you got the Star Wars Insider every couple of months. And you get that issue. And again, print media is still a big deal. You get that issue that has the first cover reveal of Darth Maul, and you just lose your mind. So that anticipation just goes up. You're like, who's this guy? He's amazing. I want to see more of this guy. And you're reading the articles and you take it over to your friend's house. And it was such, again, like you were saying, the expectations for this movie shot everyone through the roof. Like, this had to be the greatest thing ever made, or people were going to be kind of pissed. And
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of unhappy people. But prior to its release coming out, I just remember, again, how much people were fired up. And like you said, going to Taco Bell, getting those toys, just all the stuff that came along with it and how much fun it was. I can't even replicate that. I don't know of anything nowadays that would get me that fired up.
Yeah, I mean, it was so funny because I just happened to, my wife asked for a Diet Coke from the fridge, and I pulled out and I was like, oh, there's Captain Marvel on it. And I was like, oh, there's a whole AR thing where you can kind of scan it and collect all the Marvel. And I was like, I'm gonna start going, and no, I'm not gonna do that again because I still have a whole cardboard box of Pepsi cans and
yeah. Oh my
But
gosh.
no, it's one of those things where I think it was just kind of one of those just perfect storms of just the fandom was at its height. Again, this is before Disney acquired, so again, you still saw the 20th Century Fox logo at the front, and again, that was just such a iconic hearing those the fanfare, and then
yeah.
You get everything, and again, that was such an incredible experience. I will say, I think the Phantom Menace trailer might be some of the best Star Wars content, period. Because again, you didn't have a lot of context, so you didn't know exactly what was going on, but you just were like, I want to see more of this. Because again, it had you wrapped around its finger, okay, I'm 100% in. I don't care what else is going on, but that's what I'm doing. I even kind of joked yeah, maybe I should just go up to Hollywood and camp out for a couple days and see it at the Chinese theater, because that seemed to be the geek mecca that you had to really do. And so I remember locally there was a radio station. I want to say it was B100 or whatever it was, one of those 100.7 stations, maybe Star at that point, I don't remember. But they had a guy that was actually camped out in Mission Valley. I remember his name was Jedi Josh, and he was the first in line, and he was going to stay there for the however long it was until he got his ticket, and he was just going to stay there for the whole time. And I was like, oh wow, again, that's a commitment level that at the time I had a job. I don't think I could just say, yeah, just go ahead and take a couple of weeks off. Is that cool? No, okay.
Until you said it, I had sort of forgotten that there was even a line to get tickets ahead of time. There was a pre-line to the line months before, where we all oh my God, their tickets go on sale at midnight or whatever the heck it was, and we're all lined up like a bunch of crazy people.
So I saw it at the AMC Mission Valley, which at the time was probably about 5 years old, and in my brain was it was the closest to us. It was kind of the easiest one to kind of get to for the big theaters, and it was going to have probably 20 screens showing it, so it just kind of made sense. At some point I was going to see it. I'd love to see the 1201, but if there'll be enough showtimes throughout that midnight hour that I'd be able to see it. So do you remember where you saw it?
It was Regal Cinemas in Rockville, Maryland. Shout out Regal Cinemas, which was a brand new theater at the time, fairly brand new, maybe a year or two old at the most. And yeah, they had the old school kind of box office out in front. It wasn't in a mall, which was nice. It was just kind of its own standalone structure. But they've built it up in the years since. It's massive now. If it's still there, I'll have to confirm if they actually close it down or not. But at the time, it was sort of the movie mecca for the area I was living in. Me and my friends getting the tickets. And then going back, and my brother, actually, I should shout out my brother while we have the opportunity, because he was the one nice enough to do the bulk of standing in line for that midnight show. He helped us out because we had to come from work. And then we might have taken a little bit longer by stopping to get food. So shout out to Mark. Thank you so much for holding our place in line. But yeah, we did that whole thing. I can't remember how many of us there were. It was a big group, 8 to 12 of us, something like that, for that midnight showing.
Yeah, I went with my best friend and best man James, and then his sister and Peggy joined us later. And this is kind of pre cell phone, so we just kind of like,
Right.
well, I'm gonna be in line, so and I'll be the guy in the Star Wars shirt, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's a simpler time where like people are like, ah, yeah, I know you've been here for 5 hours, you know you can jump in line, you know.
Oh man, yeah. And again, there were like the smart people who had like chairs and stuff, and we weren't them. That was not us. We're
I was,
just-
I was somewhere in the parking garage, down the ramps, and then yeah, through the parking lot. It was wild.
no, the only the silver lining was that at least it was a nice May evening in Maryland, so we didn't have to worry about weather or anything like that. Nothing, no rain, wasn't unseasonably cold or anything like that. It worked out really well as far as my memory goes on that. Um, but and again, you reminded me too. Uh, you see it now on advertisements for movies, like the big summer things that are coming out. You're like, oh, tickets available now, and like you're like, oh, cool, and you just roll over and you pick up your phone. And so I'm sort of like, what's the point now? It's like, again, you can't kind of build that anticipation the same way because everything's at your fingertips. So I don't know. I feel like it's gonna be really hard to kind of recreate that level of fervor, if you will. Maybe the closest was when Endgame came out.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, and this was also the time of you needed a physical ticket. Like you
Yeah,
can just
yeah.
actually have like, ones on your phone. And, I was like thinking like, gosh, like what if I like lost those tickets? Like, then I'd be out of luck. Like, I'd have to buy more tickets. So, but yeah, I remember the midnight shows sold out very quickly. And I think I want to say they like put it at 12:30 and 1. And like, they just had them spaced throughout the night. And I remember afterwards, like part of me, because I was going to go back to work the next day, because I'd taken the day off to go to the movie. And I was like, should I just stay up and just see it a second time while I'm there? Like, I might as well. Like, I'm already awake and like I'm not going to go to sleep right away, but I have my feelings and I want to like see it again with like, but then I was like, no, I think I better see it the second time once, I've had a little sleep. I can think about it. I can kind of reset my expectation levels and everything like that. But it was really hard at that time though, because again, I had such huge
Right.
expectations. And, again, I remember like, I had just met Peggy in February. And so I was like telling her like, this is like going to be my thing. And I'm so excited about it. I remember like, talking about it with her mom, like the first time I met her mom. And I was like, yeah, and I like, she saw like the disappointment on my face and she was like, oh no, not what you wanted, huh? And I was like, well, like it's one of those things, like because I hadn't had like I was starved for Star Wars content,
Of
and
course, of course.
I needed something to like feed that beast, and it kind of felt like um, I wasn't getting what I wanted, but it wasn't because necessarily the content was bad. It was the expectations were high.
You know, I will agree with you, and I think we did. At least a few of us did the same thing that you were talking about, like going back the next day and seeing it. I don't remember if we went like early in the morning or if it was later in the day. That I don't recall, but I know we went back the next day to see it again, and having sort of the altered expectations. And again, like I was actually sort of, it wasn't what I expected, but I was still like the fired up Star Wars guy. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna see this again. I'm gonna like it more because I'm gonna understand it more. It's gonna click more. I'll be more acceptable to it. But again, you sort of get to that. You get the fanfare, the Star Wars, the scroll starts, and you're like, taxation of trade routes. What are we watching? And I think The
Yeah,
Simpsons did a great gag about that too, where they're reading the scroll, and it was like very, taxing this and taxing that, and Bart's like, what the heck is this?
yeah. In hindsight, I'm sure George Lucas was probably like, was the Trade Federation really the true villain that they want to make it up? Because again, I think everybody was waiting for Darth Maul to do something,
Yeah.
because I think absolutely like makeup and everything, and again, uh, we're definitely going to talk about the Clone Wars at some point there to this, but again, it was just such like a menacing, pun intended, figure, and you were wanted to have his Vader moment, his big lines and everything else like that. And he has some lines, but doesn't really have a lot. And so we hearing about his like wanting his revenge and everything else like that, I was like, oh wow, like I'm really excited for Maul as the villain versus the Nemoidians where the lips don't match the,
Yeah.
and I remember specifically though that first opening, kind of feeling like I kind of felt like it was being like punked. Like I thought they were like gonna stop the movie and like, go, hey, just kidding, y'all. This is how the incredible use of CGI can improve like the rubber masks and everything else like that, like we used to have. And now here's the real movie starting. And I was like, oh no, that was it, and that was not great.
um, yeah, you and I have talked previously. We've both had a roller coaster ride of a relationship with the prequels, and I think we've both come around to kind of finally embracing them very fully. I loved them at the beginning, and then I became like the prequel apologist guy, like defending them at all stops against all attackers, and then eventually that just wore me out and beat me down, and I was like, all right, maybe they're right, and I kind of was like, about the prequels, and then I sort of just started to accept them, and then I got to the point where it's like I embraced them for what they are, and the fact that it's created more Star Wars fans than I ever thought about, like you had said. I didn't really think about that for the longest time, that it created an entire new generation of Star Wars fans that are just as rabid for the content as we are. And that's a really great thing to think about. And like you said, it's not necessarily for the cranky middle-aged person who who wants to recapture their childhood necessarily. Um, what, do you remember like what just some of the things that you thought were not the greatest when you first saw it, and maybe how you've changed on that since?
Yeah, I mean, so for me anyway, obviously the big one is Jar Jar, who's a very polarizing character. And again, it's one of those things. I want to make sure, like, I was actually never one of those like, this movie ruined my childhood. I can't enjoy the Star Wars movies anymore or anything else like that. But I left the theater disappointed. And again, I think it was more about the expectations than anything else. But again, there was just some of the characters kind of had the weird accents and kind of a bit. Was it?
It
I don't
definitely
know.
hit the ear a little funny the first couple times you watch it. You're like, I don't know about that.
Yeah. But again, I did actually get a chance to see the Phantom edit, which was incredible to see Jar Jar's voice basically in a kind of like a alien language, and so everything was subtitled, and so you didn't have the Misas and the Yusas and the
right.
But one of the things I was thinking about was I now have cousins that are in their tens and teens and everything else like that, and their favorite character is Jar Jar.
Mm-hmm.
And they loved it when he stepped in poop, because it was that funny that he said, oh, and again, I was like, yeah, if I was their age seeing this for the movie, first time for this movie, I'd be blown away. I'd be like, oh my God, this is perfect. This is funny,
Yeah.
It squeezed me. Absolutely. Like, that was funny. Like, again, like, because again, that was the target audience of that film. And so, again, it is too bad that there is a element of the Star Wars fandom that is very negative and kind of focuses on and goes after. I mean, I feel horrible for what has happened with Jake Lloyd. He was not the problem. Hayden Christensen wasn't the problem. Ahmad Best is not the. Again, George Lucas. Oh, by the way, happy birthday, George Lucas. Today we're recording on his birthday.
Oh my gosh, you're right. Thank the maker.
Yeah.
Happy birthday to the maker himself.
Yeah. We're kind of at this point where, we know his limitations. This is the film that he wanted to make. He's not a great writer. To be honest with you, he's not even really a great director. But what he is he has a vision, and he created this world. And what that inspiration, that spark did, was made so many other filmmakers love the films, love the project, want to, participate in it, want to go and make their own Star Wars. And that's really what the genesis of, Phantom Menace and the clone, the direct coordination, between, Phantom Menace and Filoni, and him going, oh, there's so many gaps that I want to fill in. And how much more I appreciate, the prequels because of the gaps that are filled in, because there's more color and the wait, why is Padme doing this? And I don't understand this. And what in the Prince and the Pauper, or the handmaidens and the decoys, and Keira Knightley does not look anything like.
Right.
So,
That
but no, it was
was
it was one of those things where I could definitely pick that movie apart, but you could probably do that with every Star Wars movie
Mhm.
if you really wanted to. And really, what you have to do is you just have to accept that this is, long form storytelling with a lot of elements that you're not going to love every element of it, and
Right.
that's okay because somebody else is loving it.
Yeah, I mean, the prequels are sort of George Lucas. I don't want to say like running amok necessarily, but like he's unchecked, right? Like he's just like doing his thing. And I suppose that's probably the biggest difference between the prequels and the original trilogy was he had a producer like Gary Kurtz who was going to challenge him and kind of force him to kind of keep the narrative in check. And I don't want to take shots at anybody, but he didn't have a producer like Kurtz on the prequels, so he got to go into some wild directions, for better or worse. And we still see reverberations of that to this day, where Disney or Filoni or whoever is very cautious about using certain words from the prequels, even though they've seemingly have come around to embrace them. We still don't say midichlorians. Now we're saying M count. And there's like little details like that you notice. Where like, oh, we're not really talking about that very much. We haven't seen a Gungan in a million years. There are still certain things that Disney or Lucasfilm, Kathy Kennedy, whoever, seems to be a little sensitive about still, and it's very interesting to me that again, as a culture, we seem to have come full circle and embraced the prequels, but Lucasfilm's still a little scared of them, which is weird to me. I don't know. What do you think?
Definitely agree. I mean, I remember the time the whole midichlorian thing was just like it kind of felt like, well, why are you trying to find a scientific explanation for the Force?
Right. I think Patton
And
Oswalt said it best, actually. He's like, don't explain to me the thing. Don't explain the thing that I
yeah,
love. I don't need to explain. Just let them do the thing I love.
and part of the thing what I absolutely loved about Last Jedi, which I know is a very polarizing topic, and we could go off on
That's a
another
whole other
a whole
podcast.
other podcast, but we'll say for their anniversary to talk
Yes.
about that. But what I loved is that anybody could be force sensitive, and anybody could be a Jedi, and that's as the kid who saw the movie in 1982, that like I want to be able to like be a force master. I want to be a Jedi. I want to be able to do all those things, and if my blood count is a little off, and oh yeah, maybe a little more potassium in your diet, we could bring those up. So it just felt like a little bit of a weird explanation. And again, we didn't, like you said, we didn't need it.
Right.
We could just say, hey, he's just seems different. He can sense things and everything else like that, like they talked about. And when Qui-Gon's talking to Shmi, and it was like kind of one of those things where it was like, you know, we didn't need a blood test, anything else like that. So
Yeah, and we're again we're sort of seeing this like more this spectrum of the M count kind of more fleshed out in recent years. Obviously with Omega, and then with Sabine in the Ahsoka series, people who are like much on the further side of the M count spectrum, if you want to call it that. I don't even know if that's the word they want to use. Maybe spectrum's not a good word. Range? I don't know.
levels, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just interesting to me. It's one of those things you can't help but observe and just kind of question. And again, I at least appreciate Star Wars not trying to overly explain some of this stuff nowadays. But at the time, I was like, why are they talking about this? I don't care. Just tell me that Anakin's got like a lot of Force potential, and I'm in. That's all I needed.
Totally, yeah. But I mean, again, I think there's a lot more good that I just felt overwhelmed by the bad that I couldn't get past the first viewing. And again, it was just like because of the expectations, because of just that weight was just like, oh, but that was really cool. And then now that I think about it, I think this is some of John Williams' best work, and the Duel of the Fates is hands down some of the best Star Wars score ever. The everything that's going on during the way that's all cut is very reminiscent to A New Hope and all the other Star Wars films. It's just there's I think the first viewing is like I want to stay in the Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, Darth Maul fight, and I'm cutting around to Jar Jar, and all his antics and accidental helping, win the war and everything else like that. And it was, so I think that was like, that's what took me out of it. And, I kind of felt like, it was just one of those things where I would have liked to, there's a lot of things I would have liked differently, but I need to make that movie. And George Lucas obviously made what he wanted, and he felt a success. And um, I have come around to the point where I do think it is my favorite of the prequels, which is, I know, a lot of blasphemous because so many people love Revenge of the Sith, but I have a hard time with that fight between Obi-Wan and Anakin. I just don't think it's staged well. I don't think it's choreographed well. It kind of feels laughable when when Obi-Wan cuts his legs off. To me, it just doesn't work, and I have a hard time with it. And again, that's the moment. That's the, like, this is where we're getting to. We're finding out the first time that they're really on opposite sides. And again, I've come around on that movie as well, because again, I think I audibly laughed. And the only one, and I felt a little bit bad after that, but sorry, but it didn't work for me. But what I loved about Phantom Menace, because we both went to go see it on a re-release, which one of the things I would have liked to have seen, and again, this is just me, complaining as an AMC A-list, that it would have been nice if they had put it in like a premium theater, if they had shown it in IMAX, if they put it in Dolby, if they'd done something just to make it a little bit more special. Because again, not that the theater that I saw in Fashion Valley wasn't nice, but again, it wasn't the same theatrical experience if it had been with a huge booming soundtrack and everything else like that. So
I sort of wondered about that, and I was listening to another podcast, and they pointed something out that hadn't really occurred to me. But all these movie studios now are like starving to put things in theater, so they're doing all these re-releases because there's no content right now. The strike is, we're in this period where like the strike is now rearing its head, right? Where there's just like Sony's putting out all the Spider-Man movies. Star Wars is back. I wouldn't be surprised if other Star Wars movies pop back up again too, even though it's like the 22nd anniversary, or something like that.
Well, so last year they put Jedi in theater. I remember going to see that with Caesar and his daughter Natasha, and it was just like, it was incredible because again, I was seeing this through at the same age as my friend's daughter, like, and it was like the idea of like, I love the Ewoks, but again, I was also and it worked for me. And I still I consider myself an Ewok apologist.
It's
I like
okay.
Porgs.
This is the podcast for that. Don't worry.
Yeah,
you're amongst friends. You're safe.
I love the Porgs. Like, again, I'm okay with a little bit of like cute in Star Wars because it feels like that's that's an acceptable level. But Ewoks are also pretty badass too. So whereas the Gungan, they ultimately do like win out. I mean, it helps. Anakin gives them a little assist there, and in the droid control center there. But again, it's one of those things where I think the Gungan are kind of essentially the Ewoks. They're they're kind of goofy looking. They make kind of noises and everything else like that. So that's kind of their role, is the kind of the native person who helps the resistance rebels, everything else like that, kind of get to their meet their goal. And they're, unfortunately, a lot of them are cannon fodder as well.
I was thinking again from when we were texting last week after we had both rewatched Phantom Menace in theaters, and you kind of come around saying how it might be the best of the prequels. I think it made me look at it a little bit differently in the sense that rewatching it and then I kind of re-examining it compared to the other movies. Like it might be the most like purely Star Wars movie of the three, because they all be kind of, episodes 2 and 3 kind of become, I don't want to say not Star Wars, but there's definitely a storyline they're trying to get through, the whole Anakin thing and the love story that, that whatever, you can say whatever you want about the love story, but like Phantom Menace is just kind of a pure Star Wars movie. There's a certain innocence to it and childlike wonder for it, but that's kind of what Episode 4 is at the same time. And it gave me some new a new light to shine on the Phantom Menace.
And it definitely stands alone. Like it feels like much like A New Hope. Kind of ends with like, hey, if you didn't know that there was another trilogy and you didn't know, like, kind of stands on his own. It's like, hey, they got the big glowing ball and like
Which I still don't
getting
know
the
what that
medals
is. I still
at
don't
the
know.
end, so we're good. We we defeated the bad guy, or maybe question mark. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the Phantom Menace they defeated.
Uh,
Oh man. Yeah. It's again watching that movie this time around. I sort of changed my tune on the prequels a few years back, but getting to see it again and kind of thinking about it on a different level than I had in the past years. I really have a blast watching this movie. And again, like you, I had to come around and accept the choices that George Lucas made. I think a lot of us were sort of like, what do you mean Anakin Skywalker's a little kid in this movie? What are you talking about? What do you mean Obi-Wan Kenobi's not the main Jedi? Like, what are you talking about? But I don't know. To me, like, Qui-Gon Jinn is a great Jedi, sort of epitomizes that era. And I love the fact that, again, as you watch this movie, and we have, 25 plus years of content after it now, to sort of see, like, oh, Qui-Gon was the only one kind of knowing what was going on. Like, he was the only one kind of paying attention, like following the living force and not getting sucked into like all the politics and stuff like that. Like, if Qui-Gon doesn't die in the Phantom Menace, maybe the Jedi are a little bit more self-aware when it comes time for the Clone Wars. I don't know, but to me, Qui-Gon is just like this great, awesome Jedi who he looks the part, he talks the talk, he walks the walk. I love Qui-Gon Jinn. I can't get enough of that guy.
yeah, I was gonna say it was a really good performance by Liam Neeson. I was actually really happy to see. Obviously, he came back for the Obi-Wan
Mm-hmm.
series. I would hope that maybe that door is open to maybe use him again. I know he's done some voice work and everything else like that,
Mm-hmm.
but it'd be nice to be able to have him back in the universe at some point. Obviously, there's his circle is closed, but there's still a lot that we could learn about him before, Phantom Menace and everything else like that. So it'd be kind of nice to at least have that possibility. I do remember though, like it very much felt like when I was viewing it in '99 for the first time, that it felt like they were really trying to make, Qui-Gon the Obi-Wan in A New Hope, and then his death was like the thing that like spurred on Luke slash Obi-Wan to kind of go forward and and everything else like that. And I just remember I felt like it because we didn't, and Liam Neeson is a fantastic actor, but I felt like we didn't get to know Qui-Gon enough, that it was also kind of one of those things where I was like, well, I felt a little cheated. Like I just wanted more of him. I didn't realize that he was going to be the one that
Right.
that died. And I also kind of didn't understand that. Well, wait a minute. Why didn't his body like disappear with the
Right.
Force like Obi-Wan did? And why did they have to burn his body like Vader? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't understand this. And I just need to kind of let go.
There were so many questions. There were so many
Yeah.
questions. And Star Wars,
Yeah.
Star Wars loves to answer the questions we don't want answers to, but not so good at the other ones. Because I mean, I remember by the time Episode 3 rolls around, and that's still something that the fans are talking about. Like, why aren't the Jedi disappearing? And we never really get a concrete explanation. Yoda says something very vague to Obi-Wan at the very end of uh, Revenge of the Sith, and then we don't really find. They kind of don't pick it up until Kenobi at the very last episode, and you're like, oh, all right, well, there's a Force ghost, and apparently Qui-Gon's the one that cracked the code. So yeah, Star Wars has always been weird about that. Like they are not fans of explaining themselves sometimes. Like keep the Force mysterious, I suppose. I don't know. But what else from that movie stands out to you? I mean, I can't help but have insanely fond memories, even from the jump of the pod race. I mean, that's fantastic, and that's very George Lucas at peak George Lucas powers.
It's his race in American Graffiti. It's Ben Hur. It's just like the big epic. And again, it's a pretty long sequence in the film.
And
It's a
looks
big chunk
great
of
in
it.
theaters
Um,
too.
yeah, but man, like just that sequence is, and again, I want to say there was video games, like pod racing video
Oh
games, and
yeah,
everything else like that. It felt like you were in the middle of like a video game. It just was such an incredible experience, and it worked. Again, it was just one of those things where I feel like the hour that it took to get to Tatooine,
yeah.
like, oh, okay. Well, so now we're gonna go in because you're like, oh, Tatooine now. No, I know that planet. I know this is what's here. You know, wretched hive of scum and villainy. Like we're here. We reached a place that's more familiar to me now. And again, it's the race has to be set up, and you have Sebulba, and you have everything going on. But it was kind of fun to see how that. And I don't know if you've watched any of like the Star Wars Visions,
Oh yeah.
but then there's one of the episodes, and I think I want to say it was one of the Aardman ones maybe, but like they had like the pod races, and I was kind of thinking like, wow, like there's probably like street pod races like not just like the hut ones, but like there's like little side hustle, like you want to settle this, let's get in the pod races and let's sort it out. So it's kind of an interesting, like, obviously chance and gambling is a big thing on the planet, so it's kind of like cool to think about, like, there's all this other pod racing, illegal pod racing, or not licensed or sanctioned or anything else by the Hutt. So
I still have that pod racing video game, by the way. So it's,
Right.
I still have the Sega Dreamcast to play it on. Don't worry.
Love it. That's awesome.
Yeah, again, 10 years. If we had talked about the Phantom Menace at like his 10 or 15-year anniversary, I probably would have had a lot more quibbles to kind of talk about. But I really have just come full circle on it. I just embrace this movie for what it is. I have a good time when I watch it. Like you said, and I agree with you, George Lucas's writing could be a little clunky, but in this one, I've kind of gotten past it. There's certain things that we don't need, like midi-chlorians and some of the other stuff. But
I don't know. I thought it was pretty wizard.
yeah, there you go. But it's also, we go to Coruscant for the first time. We see Coruscant with our own eyes for the first time. We go to the Galactic Senate, and I can't help but thinking to myself, I was like, Jesus, no wonder Palpatine wiped these guys out. They suck. Just
kind of like maybe our own. So I'm not just saying. Yeah, no.
The parallels to reality are too much right now. I can't handle it.
Insurrections. I don't know what's going on here.
Oh man, yeah, but it's so funny because it's this throwaway line in episode 4. The Emperor's dissolved the Senate. And now you see the Senate, and you're like, yeah, I would have dissolved them too. They're in the way.
One of the things, I think one of my biggest things I was a little bit upset with at the time, and maybe I'm still a little bit harping on it because I didn't write it down in my notes. But so you had a fantastic actor, Terrence Stamp, as the Supreme Chancellor, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like this is General Zod. This is going to be like a huge moment. I cannot wait for him to give that like big line to like
right.
And he basically says,
yeah,
that's about it. And it's like, well, that's not exactly what I had in mind for the big moment, unfortunately. But again, maybe George Lucas is just like want to give Terrence Stamp press his grandkids and everything else like that.
Yeah, I mean the fact that no one kneeled in front of him was feels like a missed opportunity. but that sort of continues in the next film too, because I love Christopher Lee, but Christopher Lee doesn't do a whole lot in episode 2. Yes, he gets into the great lightsaber fight with Yoda, but he doesn't. I don't know. Dooku becomes a fully formed character for me in the Clone Wars, in the animated series. Dooku doesn't really have a ton of great moments in Attack of the Clones or his brief appearance in Revenge of the Sith. It's just one of those characters that gets more fleshed out in the animated. So Terrence Stamp, Christopher Lee, yeah, it's great they're in there, but are they utilized to their best potential? Probably not.
Yeah, and maybe maybe Lucas was a little afraid to try to write something, and then like, well, I don't want them to think of like General Zod, or they think of Dracula or any of the other characters that Christopher Lee played. Again, it was like one of those things, like I needed a more muted role for them, but it felt too muted.
Yeah. Well, and again, I don't want to slam the maker on his birthday, but we've talked about Lucas, not the greatest scripter, and his dialogue, a lot of it doesn't have like that gravitas you want it to have. You look back.
You had like Lawrence Kasdan coming in.
I was just gonna say,
because again, some of the dialogue, especially about sand and the next film, like again, it's one of those things like there definitely feels weird for a teenage Padme to be also kind of looking at Anakin like, hey, yeah, that's where I want to go next.
I'm rewatching Attack of the Clones right now, and I've had the same problem since it first came out. but now in light of today's current climate, the things that Anakin says, those are grounds for restraining orders. Those, like the court would intercede. Like I'm like,
Yeah,
oh,
I
that
mean,
is stalker-esque, Anakin. Back off.
yeah. It is kind of odd, like again, because she's like, calls him basically a funny little boy, and it's like,
Yeah.
how does that switch change? Like,
Yeah, well, and, in like 2 or 3 more years, we'll talk about the Attack of the Clones more in depth, and like again, there'll be a lot to say about that dialogue in there. That romance, not the smoothest, in my opinion.
definitely not.
But like I said, as far as this movie goes, I've really come 360 on it. I'm back to loving it like I did initially, even though I had those reservations coming out of the theater in 1999. I really have just kind of accepted it for the fun that it is, and I don't know what I'm trying to think of some more like highlights we can kind of get into because again, I just find the movie really enjoyable. I like all the performances for the most part. Is everyone utilized the best? Probably not. Was it a good decision to switch Yoda to the CG puppet, CG instead of the puppet? Because remember that first release, he was a puppet and it didn't look
Yeah.
that great.
But I actually love that they went back to Puppet Yoda in Last Jedi because for me it works because I feel as much as CGI has gone incredible things, and like I said, the Nemoidians are just probably the thing I have the hardest part with. Because again, the lips not matching, like and everything else like that. Again, personal thing. Had a hard time with it. Can't get over it just because of personal thing. But I loved the Yoda puppet version more because again, Frank Oz. I remember I want to say there was an interview with like Sam Jackson. He was so into character that like when like Frank would take a little break, he would like lay Yoda down and he'd be like, "Oh, what's wrong, Master Yoda?" And he'd be like, "Oh wait, no, that's just a puppet."
Yeah, it is funny because I liked it when they brought it back that way in The Last Jedi as well. But it's funny watching. I still have the original version of the Phantom Menace on DVD. I can still see Puppet Yoda whenever I want to, and so I don't know why it doesn't work as well as I want it to. At the time, I didn't think I had any qualms about it, but I don't know. Maybe it's just one of those things Lucas couldn't help but tweak because that's sort of who he is.
And that's maybe the biggest criticism is that he can't just let his movies, play and know warts and all, like, hey, special effects are gonna, change in the next 25 years and everything's gonna be different, but you can still appreciate 2001. You don't need to, update. The monkeys don't need to be CGI. We don't need,
Right.
like more, stars in the space or anything else like that. And I think that was the biggest criticism when they did the re-releases is that you added these things and you changed who shot first and everything else like that, and stepping on Jabba's tail and everything else like that. And I kind of felt like with Puppet Yoda, it just felt more real. And again, I know this is a movie that's uses probably at the time more CGI than ever been on screen before. But there's something just real about the way the puppet was, and it worked for me.
No, and that was always one of the things I really liked about the sequel trilogy was that they went back to more practical effects and the puppetry and costumes and so I have crazy respect for that. And one of the things I was going to bring up earlier too, and you just kind of alluded to it, but when last year when I went back and saw Jedi in the theaters for his anniversary, I love Jedi, but I don't need that new version. I don't need Jedi Rocks in there. I don't need that song. I don't need that musical number. Give me Cy Snoodles doing the old stuff with the Max Rebo band. That's what I like.
Absolutely, and Yub Nub forever too.
Yes, and Yub Nub forever. Thank you for saying that, because that's like the other element of Jedi that sort of bums me out. It's like, no, Yub Nub, come on, man.
Yeah, and like I don't love the Hayden Christensen Anakin.
Yeah.
Like, if it felt weird. Like, well, wait, are we gonna go back and are we gonna replace Ewan McGregor? And again, it timeline just feels again. Is it when he died, or was he no longer Vader, or when did he get, again, there's not a lot of explanation of why, but you did mention something that I really thought uh, about. I think the costuming in a Phantom Menace, and obviously Padme's dresses in particular,
Mhm.
are some of the best. And the production design, the way they got Naboo from, the Italian villa that feels like it was Venice or something like that, just, just absolutely like amazing looking film. And
Yes.
shots, the shots coming of the creatures coming out of the fog, and it just very much feels like Kurosawa. Like it was just absolutely visually looking, probably one of the best looking Star Wars movies.
And I love the contrast between the original trilogy and the prequels, because everything's kind of like older and more broken down looking. Everything's used and worn in episodes 4, 5, and 6, and in the prequels everything's kind of like shiny and new, and it has like this luster to it. So like you can see the galaxy's in a very different place than when we catch up when we meet Han and Luke and Leia and everybody. And I love that contrast between those elements, and that production design, like you said, the costuming. I think it's all top notch. I mean, the film looks great, and it being boosted up in the 4K recently is glorious. It looks fantastic, whether it's back in the theaters or on your 65-inch TV at home. It looks great, and that pod race is rad, but it still looks.
Oh, sound on that is just insane, especially when you're hearing all the different engines starting up. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, the sound quality is, Ben Burt and the sound techs have always been phenomenal in Star Wars. They turn it up a notch in the prequels because they have so much more technology at their hands. One of
hands
the
down.
one of the other elements I wanted to talk to you about. Again, there's not a lot of carryover between the different trilogies, but two characters who are sort of integral to all of it are R2 and C3PO. And I wanted to ask you how you felt about their introductions in this movie. Like, was it what you expected at all? I'm guessing not, but go ahead and kind of tell me your feelings, because I think we all have a fondness for these characters, and their introduction was definitely not necessarily out of left field, but not where we thought it was.
Yeah. Obviously, like at the very beginning, we see another protocol droid in silver, and we're like, oh. And I just immediately, the first thing you think of obviously is C3PO, and then we find out that he's being, you know, built essentially by Anakin
Mm-hmm.
on Tatooine, and we leave C3PO on Tatooine, not knowing if we're ever going to see him again, or Shmi, or anything else like that. And then R2 is the astromech that could, like the one survivor that's somehow managed to like keep the ship afloat and keep everything going. And well, we're gonna keep you around a little bit longer now that you're still alive.
I,
Maybe we won't have you in space as much.
I actually really liked the R2D2 introduction, because I was sort of like, oh, that's what, okay, astromech. Now I kind of get it a little bit more than I did him just as being like an X-wing co-pilot.
Yeah,
For
yeah,
some reason, I was like, oh, this makes sense to me. And like, it would make sense that you deploy these guys to do repairs in flight or in battle or whatever like that. I was like, for some reason that really clicked with me. And then R2's personality is always kind of there, so you know who he is right away. The C3PO thing is interesting because obviously it puts all those fan theories line up, with why Darth Vader stops the stormtrooper from blasting Chewbacca and C3PO in Cloud City. I suppose that works now, right? Because he's the one who made him.
yeah. Although, so again, there's all that like, well, we had the memories wiped, so we're gonna go ahead and like, is there any like trace memory of like remembering being on Tatooine, remember being built? But yeah, again, obviously, you just wipe the memory, and that makes it easy. Wizard did it
Yeah, and
way.
I just
Yeah,
I love those two characters. I love Anthony Daniels. I'm glad they always try to find a way to bring them all back into doing different things. Um, Obviously R2, it's a pretty big part in the Clone Wars, which is fun. Uh, but it is sort of funny too, because Anakin kind of becomes dismissive of C3PO like everybody else does, which is interesting to me. It's like even he gets kind of annoyed with him at a certain point. It's like, all right, enough.
yeah. Come on.
But yeah, oh, I don't know what else to talk about necessarily, because I think this is a film that deserves, and probably has gotten sort of reevaluated over the years. So if there's anybody listening and you've sort of haven't watched it in a while, I definitely encourage you to go back and give it another go, because It's a really enjoyable flick. Is it the Star Wars movie we thought we were going to get in 1999 when we were all standing in line? Maybe not. But it's a Star Wars movie. And I think in recent years, with the exploration of the Clone Wars and Rebels and everything I think they've done a real service to the film, kind of making it all connected. And I look back on the film now and I have a fondness for it from seeing it. And even though I was, had a little disappointment, I look back at it now and it's a great time. And I really appreciate the movie for what it is. And again, maybe this is like the nostalgic part for me, is I look back at the prequels now and I realize that George Lucas is done. Like, we need to appreciate these for what he brought to the table, because George Lucas isn't telling any more Star Wars stories. The Bad Batch was probably like the official end of his story influence, but like this is sort of like his last live action iteration of things. So I think the prequels in general deserve a reevaluation, but this movie is definitely not the worst of the prequels. If you wanted to go that route and try to rank them, I think the Phantom Menace actually stands pretty tall.
Agreed. I like I said, I put it probably at the top, and I would say probably Attack of the Clones at the bottom of the Star Wars films, just because there's just a lot that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But it's also, this is people walking around with laser swords, so you have to give a little bit of suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things where, again, at the end of the day, I'm happy that there's more Star Wars I'm glad that these films got made, even if I wasn't the audience for them at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that there's out there, because they inspired more people to tell more stories about Star Wars, and that's never a bad thing.
And I think that's the thing that I had to kind of come to grips with after a while, because again, by the time we get through Revenge of the Sith, I sort of gotten the popular culture had turned on Star Wars a bit. They were kind of it was very in to make fun of Star Wars prequels. And so when the Clone Wars rolled around, I was still I felt a little beaten up by being a Star Wars fan. And so I didn't embrace the Clone War cartoon when it first came around. I was watching, but I wasn't connecting with it in the way that I needed to, in the way that I eventually would. I mean, it would win me over, but it did take some time. and I think that was an unfortunate consequence of just kind of getting beaten up by my initial reaction and the popular culture's initial reaction to the prequels. But again, everything's kind of come around full circle. The circle is now complete, as Vader likes to say. I liked the movie 1989, and then I kind of like turned around on it, and now I'm back where I started. It's like, yeah, I really like these again. And I'm again, like you said, it started a whole new generation. I'm very, very happy watching these flicks again. And I had something for you and I lost it. Now I'm bummed out because I was going to go somewhere with that. Oh gosh, Ken, I've blown it.
Well, I was going to say, I also really enjoyed how we start seeing Palpatine kind of like pulling the strings here a little bit, and like, oh, maybe we should try to get a new Chancellor. I could be. I mean, I could, but like, again, you'd have to let me know if you want me to be.
You know what? That's a great thread.
Very subtle, just like, let me just nudge things over a little bit this way. And next thing you know, oh my God, the Emperor is taking control.
And actually, that's not too far off from where I was going to go, because initially what I was going to say was one of the reasons why I think I agree with you in that I might put Phantom Menace above Revenge of the Sith is because Revenge of the Sith is a Star Wars movie that I very, very much enjoy. But the novelization of it is so much better.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The novelization is brilliant. It is so much more heartbreaking than what came across on the screen. And I don't mean that as a knock on the film, because I do enjoy the film very, very much. But exploring it through what I think is very excellent prose by I'm blanking on the Matthew Stove. Oh God. Oh, I'll get his name for you in a second. It'll click. But that adaptation for episode 3 is excellent, and I think it's superior than the film. So I think that's why it puts the Phantom Menace a notch above it. But like you were just saying, Palpatine's machinations is starting to kind of take shape a little bit in this one. Kind of see how he's pulling the strings, and again, it's crystallized a little bit more fully in this episode 3 novelization that I'm talking about. But when you realize that the entire thing has just been a trap for the Jedi, you're just like, this is so brilliant. And Lucas is limited because he's telling a 2-hour movie. But when you get to explore these things in like the Clone Wars and some of the books that they use to kind of fill in the gaps, you realize that Palpatine has been pretty legit bad guy for a long, long time. I recommend the Darth Plagueis book as well. Very, very good.
Awesome. Yeah. No, again, it's one of those things where, and again, we've seen him through both, or no, all three trilogies, and so I was just thinking of other characters that kind of carried over that way, and so we've seen him, pop up in all three, and again, what a fantastic performance, because again, he's just kind of like your Lobo uncle that he's just trying to do what's right, and yeah, we can do that, Padme. Let me know. But I could have even more power if you wanted me to.
He could have unlimited power.
Limited.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I think one of the things I kind of hit on a lot when I'm doing this podcast, and I just did it for the Tales of the Empire, how like when it comes to like some of the animation stuff or like these anthologies and in the movies in particular, we kind of hit on these touchstone points in the characters' lives, like that's essentially what the prequel is, like these big moments for Anakin on his journey to the dark side. But it's that stuff that's in the middle. That stuff that's in the Clone Wars. That stuff that's in the books and the comics that kind of fill in those gaps and let us see that character a little bit more fully. That I really, really like. And that's sort of like the one shortcoming that the Star Wars films have is like there's not enough runway in a movie to kind of get all these characters the love they need. And that's the only real knock I have on the prequels nowadays. When I watch them again, I'm like, gosh, I wish this was explored a little bit more fully. Gosh, I wish this character had a little bit more screen time so that we could see like the wheels in motion here, And that's probably the only, like, I guess my only real complaint about the prequels now is that it's too much. There's like too much happening, and I wish there was a little bit more time for the minutia.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be nice to have a little smaller scale and a little bit of just focus here, but because it's an epic, it's a whole saga that's needed to be told, and that's why the brilliance of the live action and animated TV shows is that you have that time to explore those little parts of the world, stuff that's going on, during, the time of the prequels and the time of, some of the other time frames. Did you stick around for the trailer for the Acolyte?
Oh yes. I'm very intrigued. Very, very intrigued.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the first time seeing this time frame on screen is kind of a really unique thing, and I mean, obviously, we just talked about The Matrix, so Carrie-Anne Moss as a Jedi is pretty badass, and I'm kind of curious to see how it's going to play out. One of the things, so after watching the sequence that she has, the fight there, is I wish that these shows, like they would show them in theaters, like on a big screen, because again, I love 6 o'clock and on Disney Plus watching on my TV, but like that experience of watching something together, for the first time, like we did in '99 to see Phantom Menace, like that crowd was just like so excited for it.
Yeah.
And so it would have been cool if they found a way, because like you said, we're in a little bit of a content drought because of the strike kind of catching up with the the releases. Like I think I would pay money to see the Star Wars episodes, again, maybe $5 fan favorite or something like that, but yes, I could watch it on Disney Plus, but like I also go see it with a bunch of Star Wars nerds and cheer and everything else like that. So
you know what? After watching Phantom Menace last week, I ended up rewatching Kenobi, which is a pretty easy rewatch because it's only like 6 episodes or whatever.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help but thinking that like it had a very cinematic look to it. Deborah Chow did a great job. I thought it would look great on the big screen. So I'd be down for that 100%. Like, let's make it happen. Like, where's that change.org petition? Let's go.
I mean, honestly, I have some qualms about Obi-Wan, but I feel like they stuck the landing, so that was like that made it for me. But I also kind of felt like if you could have made a 2.5-hour movie, I would have loved to have seen that in the theaters.
Yeah, and like you were saying, there's always something that we could nitpick about Star Wars if we really wanted to get into it. And Kenobi's no obsession, and well, I was gonna say the only exception might be Andor, but maybe if I tried really hard, I could find something.
Well, and I mean, I love Andor as much as everybody, and I definitely talked about it with my friend Craig on his podcast. But I don't want all my Star Wars to be Andor
No.
because I want space wizards. I want
Yes.
lightsabers. I want everything to
Yeah.
because that show when it came out, it was I think around the same time as the Padres were in the playoffs, and I just remember it was so anxiety like inducing that like right, I'm about to go watch a stressful baseball game, and then I just watched a stressful Star Wars. Like I just want to be able to like maybe I do want to see some Bantha Poodoo, like maybe I need that. I need a little break from just the high anxieties.
Yeah, no. I'll be very content with Andor just being Andor, and the rest of Star Wars can be the rest of Star Wars. That's fine by me. I think Andor will be sort of this very one-off kind of experience. I think I don't think that trying to replicate that would work very well. I think there's some ideas you could explore, but Andor's tone, I think would be really hard to replicate. especially like the weight of everything in that show is just unbelievable.
Absolutely.
Anyways,
we're
way off track.
What's your hottest Star Wars take? Because I'm gonna get mine, and I'll probably get canceled, but I'm gonna throw it out there. But what's your hottest Star Wars take?
Hottest Star Wars take?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! Like the thing that would
like the knives are at you, like everybody's not agree with.
I don't know because I don't know if I have one necessarily because I feel like the things that upset me the most about Star Wars, a lot of people have already said. Because I am not a big sequel guy. I would be okay if they figured out some way to erase them from continuity. I'd be like, oh, they found some Infinity Stones and they wiped us out. Well, all right, that's too bad. That's a real shame. Thanos showed up. Okay.
Well, again, it's one of those. I really do think the prequels helped me kind of process and appreciate the sequels on a very different level because I didn't have the same expectations. And everyone was saying, you've got to see, Force Awakens. You have to see it. You have to see it. And I was like, I am, but I'm not going to go opening night. I'm not even going to opening weekend. I'm going to go on a Monday, 7:00. A good crowd. Everybody reacted the way they should. It was a fantastic experience, but like I couldn't give it that same power that I gave episode 1 in 99.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's fair. I think it's very fair. Let me hear your hot take. Maybe you'll inspire me to give you a better one.
Oh, this is the one that like you might hang up afterwards, but I will go to my grave that Solo: A Star Wars Story is better than Rogue One.
You know what? You're not going to get much of an argument from me, actually. I just watched Solo yesterday. I love that movie. I don't know if you listened to when Reagan and I did a whole big Solo tribute episode.
Oh, nice.
I love that freaking movie. And that was a movie that I came out of the theaters kind of disappointed with at first. But on subsequent re-screenings, I absolutely adore it. I think it was maligned in theaters. It suffered from so much negative publicity before it even came out. That people need to actually get that out of their heads and watch that movie because it is a lot of fun. As a very fun Star Wars flick.
I would say that movie, I had a smile on my face the entire time. Like again, there's so many more characters there that I would love to explore and see where the world is going. I love Rogue One. I feel like the ending is what everybody kind of like zooms in on, but that first hour is just nearly unwatchable. It's so long for them to get, and it's just it's a long, it takes a long time to get started. Then it's fantastic, but it's that first hour is just like unwatchable. Like I've tried and I'm just like, no. So that's my big Star Wars hot take. Cancel me all you want.
I love it.
Big Star Wars fan, but again, Solo, I saw it opening night and then saw it again like later that weekend, and I was like, this was just so much fucking fun.
It really, really is. And again, like I said, I came into that. I struggled with it the first time I watched it. I don't know. I don't think I watched it in the right frame of mind when I saw it in theaters. But I came around on it pretty quickly once it came out on DVD, and I was able to just pop it on. And now it's like one of my favorite Star Wars movies to throw on. Like when I'm like, oh, I got to do X, Y, and Z in the living room. I can watch Solo while I'm doing all that. When you watch a lot of other Star Wars movies, you feel like you have to watch 4 other ones after it. Solo, you can just watch.
Yeah,
You just
it's a
throw it
solo
on,
film.
and yeah, and you just have fun. And it's, I think Alden Ehrenreich did a great job. He's been maligned for his portrayal of Solo, but I loved it. Obviously, Donald Glover's Lando's phenomenal. I hope that Lando show happens. So again, I agree with you. Some people may take offense to that statement, but it won't be me.
Fair. Yeah, no, again, it's one of those things. Like I definitely hope that the Lando show happens. I know that he's about to go on tour, so I'm like, well, that feels like the Lando series is going to take a back seat. And then I know they're trying to make a community film, which again, I also want. So it's like Donald Glover, like, stop being so awesome, stop being so talented and doing so many things, because I loved him in Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the Amazon series. But like, man, I really want that Lando series to happen. And
Well, especially because I'd love to get Billy D in it too, and Billy D getting older every day.
yeah, so hopefully we find something out. Maybe D23, or obviously in next year at Celebration. But it feels like we're running out of time here a little bit, because again, the we were blessed with a lot of Star Wars content, and that was like solely Star Wars content is starting to be a little less. And I think it's for the best, because you want to make sure you have better quality and not just more of it.
Right.
You know, have something in the theaters, which again I think Marvel is kind of doing as well. Is they're kind of pulling back a little bit and not doing as much content. But I miss it, because again, it was like, man, like, to think that there was going to be a Star Wars movie out like every year. While my childhood there was 3, and that was it.
Yeah, and I mean, at least finally we've gotten some word on that Mandalorian Yoda movie. We got the new Rey movie coming out. I don't know which ones are coming first, but but at least there'll be some Star Wars back on the big screen again, which would be fun.
Absolutely. I mean, as much as I do like the Disney Plus series and everything else like that, there's nothing though like being in a theater and hearing that fanfare up and everything else like that. So I am hopeful for those projects that they're going to see the light of day and be theatrical. And the one thing is, and again, maybe I'm just a big movie nerd and everything else like that, but I always feel like uh, anything is going to have more weight when I see it on the big screen versus when I'm watching it on Disney Plus or DVD or whatever. So
Yeah.
I always kind of like to be able to see things theatrically first, and then on rewatches be able to like kind of be able to see things that I maybe missed the first time.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with Star Wars, where there's so much stuff like in the backgrounds, off to the side. You have to fully embrace it. You have to see it a couple times. And oh, you know what? Actually, that was a question I was going to ask you too. Do you remember how many times you saw Phantom Menace in theaters when it came out in '99?
So I believe it was 3,
Okay.
and then this will be my 4th viewing last weekend or 2 weeks ago. So yeah.
I saw it 5 times, but by the 5th time, I was like, this was a lot of Star Wars. And I tried to spread it out through that summer, but that 5th time around, I was like, I didn't really need to see this again. I'm probably it was still fresh enough in my head.
Do you remember did you go see the 3D releases at all, or?
I did not. I was a very anti 3D person.
Same. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It felt like a total cash grab, and I didn't feel that well to go.
I wasn't that blown away with Avatar in 3D, so I really didn't feel the need to go see anything else in 3D after that. I think correct me if I'm wrong. I may have seen the first Marvel Captain America: The First Avenger in 3D because I had to. Does that sound like something they did at the time?
Yeah, I want to say we were kind of in a similar situation of like, well, there's a 2D and it's an hour later. I'm like,
Yeah, I think
and,
that's exactly what I did. I was like, I'll just see it in 3D.
Well, all right, we'll pay the extra money for the 3D, and then it was darker and not great, and so
Yes.
and especially like I feel like a movie as bright as Phantom Menace, like it definitely is one of those films where the colors are vibrant and and everything is kind of just popping out the screen, that I feel like the 3D viewing experience could mute that a little bit.
Ken, I'm going to get you out of here. I've kept you long enough, but I have to ask you one question that I hope doesn't open a can of worms. I'm going to change gears on you. I'm going to literally throw you a curveball here, because we got to talk about the Padres really quick. All right?
Oh yeah.
They take 2 out of 3 from the Dodgers over the weekend, and then they lose to the frickin' Rockies last night. You're going to game 2 tonight. Joe Musgrove bobblehead night. What's going on with this ball club? Give kind of break it down for me as quickly as you can.
So before the start of the season, I was like, this is maybe a 500 team, maybe not. And then they got Dylan Cease, and that's your ace, and he's pitching tonight, and he's fantastic. It was really fun to watch him pitch the first time I did get to see him pitch because the ball was moving. He's a fantastic. He's a pitcher that you want in the postseason. You want to basically schedule him for game 1, game 2. You'll have him, in the short series, have him come back in short rest. Like, he's one of those things. So I felt like suddenly all right, I think we've got a chance. But then I felt like, we're kind of a bat light, and I don't know if I love the DH option and everything. And then they go out and get Luis Ariz, and I'm like, oh wow, okay, back in. Like, here we are. Honestly, it hasn't been the pitching. It's been the stars haven't been starring, and that's the really bummer thing is, Manny Machado had an incredible opportunity to send everybody home happy with, and unfortunately, didn't come through. And again, the one thing about baseball is even the best hitters in the world are going to fail 70% of the time.
That's true. But Rockies, come on, man.
The Rockies. How are you losing to the Rockies?
How are you losing to the Rockies?
Because at this point in the season series, they won 3 games and the Padres have won 2. So it's a very frustrating time. I hope that obviously you have Dylan Cease, so you can feel pretty good. The hitters need to hit. I know it's a pretty simple philosophy, but really it's if you're getting so much production out of the bottom of your lineup, with a Jackson Merrill and a Jerickson Profar, you need Tatis to start being Tatis. You need to see Machado. You need to see all these players that have these long-term contracts. You need Bogarts to be Bogarts. You need all these players to start performing at their level because they are good players and they have a history and they have a track record. And I want them to succeed. I hope they succeed. I wouldn't be going to these games if I didn't think so. I wouldn't fly to Boston to go see them. So
wait, are you doing that?
Yeah. So we're gonna go at the end of June.
Awesome.
So we're gonna go to Fenway. I've never been, so I'm pretty excited about that.
I had a blast at Fenway, but then I had no rooting interest in that game. It was the Braves and the Red Sox, so I had no problem just rooting on the Red Sox and not getting in trouble with the locals. So
perfect. Yeah.
I hope you have a good experience there because it's a great ballpark, and if you have the opportunity to do a tour, it's really fun.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, no. Again, it's one of those things. The Padres, it's really frustrating to watch. And one of the things Craig says on his podcast is baseball's stupid and nobody should watch it. And mostly he's right because, again, for every 5-4 loss to the Rockies, there's also the 2-1 win on Friday night against the Dodgers, and that was like one of the most incredible experiences. And I was like, maybe what we are, Padres are, is we are a 500 team, and maybe we go a little bit above, maybe we're a little bit below. Do we make the playoffs? They have every opportunity to.
Yeah.
They have the pieces. They just have to perform.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, 2023 scarred a lot of us. And one thing about watching, the Padres and the baseball every day is that you cannot treat it the same way that you do like NFL football, English Premier League. Like results will kind of even out eventually. But if you live and die by all 162 games, you will go insane.
Well,
so you need to be able to not get too high when Michael King throws an amazing game, and you can't get too low when Matt Waldron gives up some runs. So.
Right. The baseball season is a marathon, not a sprint. So you got to pace yourself a little bit here.
Exactly.
And,
but yes.
So
very, very frustrating result, unfortunately, yesterday, and hopefully they can bounce back today.
Obviously, you're an NL West fan, so I suspect I know the answer to this question, but in Star Wars terms, who is the Empire now? Is it the Yankees or is it the Dodgers?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's always kind of been the Dodgers, hasn't it? They've obviously spent billions, and they haven't had a lot to show for it for all the money that they've spent. Um, obviously,
Dave Roberts is no Palpatine, is he?
he's a little General Grievous, I think, more than anything. But no, again, it's one of those things. Like, sometimes some of the Padres moves have been very Dodger-like, and they've given people extensions. Maybe some a little too long, maybe some a little too early. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that you have something to show for this, because obviously with Peter Seiler's passing, and I got to attend the service that they had, and seeing how much Peter meant to these players, that they're definitely giving their best, and there is that whole, for Peter, for the faithful, for the people that truly believe, and it's hard because we're all still scarred from 2023 and the disappointment of, like, I would have bet my house that the Padres would make the playoffs, like, no doubt in my mind, and
Thank God you
they
didn't.
didn't.
Thank God you
Yeah,
didn't bet your house.
thank God it's not my house, but yeah, we're at the point where it's like, now my expectations are like, I think the Padres have a realistic chance to make the playoffs, and I think they can do well in the playoffs. But they hit the Phillies, and the Phillies dominate them, then that doesn't feel great.
Right on, right on. All right, so let's go to wrap things up. If people want to follow you on the socials, are you still at Red the Trucker on Twitter and Instagram?
On the Instagram, I
You,
was permanently suspended, and then I had my account reactivated on Twitter, but I do not interact with that platform anymore because
Fair enough.
it's not great.
Yeah.
It's not great.
All right, so find Ken at Red the Trucker on Instagram, and yes, that is a Simpsons reference, my friends. Ken is a big Simpsons guy. We didn't go down that rabbit hole today, but we easily could have. Ken, thanks so much for hanging out, man. I really appreciate it, taking time out of your day, and go have fun at Petco tonight. Let's go Padres.
Let's go Padres. Awesome. Thank you so much for having me on.
Tatooine is sparsely populated. If the trace was correct, I will find them quickly, Master.
Move against the Jedi first. You will then have no difficulty in taking the Queen to Naboo to sign the treaty.
At last we will reveal ourselves to the Jedi. At last we will have revenge.
You have been well trained, my young apprentice. They will be no match for you.
All right, my big thanks to my pal Ken for hanging out with us today, joining us to talk about Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and going down the time tunnel to 1999 and kind of touching base with all the things that were going on back then. That's probably like my biggest memory of The Phantom Menace was everything that was going on around it before the movie actually even came out. All the different promotions they had going on. Ken talked about the cups at Taco Bell, which I still have a bunch of those toppers. The toy releases, going to Toys R Us at the crack of dawn when they would first open, so you could get everything before everybody else got to it, and thinking that it was all going to be worth a fortune one day, and finding out very, very quickly that it wouldn't be because they made 7 billion versions of everything. But still have a lot of those Phantom Menace figures. They will probably be bequeathed to some friends of mine and their kids at some point. And again, like one of my biggest impressions prior to the movie actually coming out, and again, I don't quite remember when the announcement was, if it was first announced in Star Wars Insider or if there was something on Entertainment Tonight. I don't remember exactly, but I remember very distinctly getting that issue of Star Wars Insider that had Darth Maul on the cover and just being like completely blown away by the image of Ray Park with the makeup and the horns, and just completely sent my anticipation for that movie through the moon. And like Ken said, I think a lot of us had some disappointment coming out of the theater, but I still loved my first time seeing that movie. It wasn't until a couple years later when I just sort of got beat down by pop culture. It was very in vogue for a long time to make fun of the prequels, and at some point it affected me in a negative fashion, and I just wanted to get some distance from the prequels and stop talking about them. And I think that was what affected my initial viewing of Star Wars: The Clone Wars when it was coming out. And as I told Ken, it won me over after a while, because it was so darn good. But you know, the Clone Wars series had some rough spots. So we've talked about that in our rewatch series. But I've really have appreciated the Clone Wars series since I started rewatching that, and the same thing with the Phantom Menace over the years, and all three of the prequels. Really, just my appreciation for them has grown so much as I've grown and matured and realized that seeing those movies for what they are and not for what I thought they would be or any sort of imaginative fiction that I had created in my mind for what the Clone Wars were and for how Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader. So I really enjoy these movies. I had a lot of fun seeing Phantom Menace back in theaters for the 25th anniversary. If you haven't picked up your copy of that Matt Ferguson poster, it's absolutely freaking gorgeous. I highly recommend it. I think the Bottleneck Gallery versions of it are probably sold out by now, but I'm sure if you are crafty enough, you can find a version of it somewhere on the internet and to adorn your walls because it looks great. Yeah, so a lot of Phantom Menace memories, and by and large, again, my opinion on this movie is changed a lot over the years. I love it. I recommend, if you've not seen it in a while, go back and check it out. It really does stand apart from a lot of other Star Wars movies in recent years. I love the performances. It's a lot of fun. The pod racing scene is excellent. Darth Maul is excellent. The lightsabers at the end, Duel of the Fates, all that stuff. So thank you to Ken for hanging out with us and reminiscing with me about all these great times in our past as we look forward to the next wave of Star Wars, which will be in June with The Acolyte. So, all right, Bucketheads, I'm going to wrap it up right there because this has been a long episode, and I hope you didn't mind the baseball talk too much. I appreciate you putting up with me on that one. Maybe not everyone's a Padres fan, but maybe you at least like baseball enough to listen to that section of the show. Thank you. All right, Bucketheads, you are the best. Remember to follow us on socials. We're at Mando_Vision, Twitter /X and Instagram. Email the show, mandovisiontom@gmail.com. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, and share the show with all the Mandalorians in your covert. If your podcasting platform allows it, sweet 5-star reviews. Help out small independent shows like us stand out, not get lost in the shuffle. Bucketheads, go out there. Be great Star Wars fans. Go watch The Phantom Menace. Get new people to watch The Phantom Menace. Laugh at Jar Jar. Enjoy the pod race. And sit on the edge of your seats as Darth Maul dances with his double-bladed lightsaber. All right, Bucketheads. We'll be back next week. We are going to try our very, very best to get the 4-episode arc with the Montez sisters in from Star Wars The Clone Wars Season 7. We're going to try very, very hard to get those recorded and posted before it's time to start talking about Star Wars The Acolyte. So stay tuned for that. I'll talk to you guys very, very soon. Remember, this podcast, it can only end one way. This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.
There's no doubt the mysterious warrior was a Sith.
Always two there are. No more, no less. A master and an apprentice.
But which was destroyed? The master or the apprentice?